what is a covenant exactly? What does that word even mean? Take a look. A covenant is an agreement entered into by two parties with obligations placed on both. Think back to marriage for a moment, and as you look at that definition, do you see that at work within the context of marriage? Do you see how a context is how a marriage is a covenant where there's responsibility placed on both parties? Do you see that? Not long ago, I did a wedding ceremony. I have the privilege of doing that quite a lot. It's an occupational perk. And so I'm working with this couple, and I want you to listen to the vows from the groom. Here they are. They're up on the screen. I, John, covenant to you, Mary, to be your loving husband, to lead you, to protect you, and provide for you in the fear of the Lord. I vow to love you as my wife, as Christ loved the church, to lay down my life for you, to love you as my own body, to nourish and cherish you even as the Lord does the church. You alone will be my delight. I will fight for you, for our sons, for our daughters. I will be yours in times of plenty and in times of want, in times of sickness and in times of health, in times of joy and in times of sorrow, in times of failure and in times of triumph. I pledge to you my life as a loyal and faithful husband. Whew. And all the women said, amen. There you go. Guys, if you heard that, and especially if you're not married yet, and if that struck just a small amount of fear into your heart, good. That's a good thing. It should strike a little bit of fear into your heart as you consider the weight, the heaviness of that covenant. Now, here's the cool thing about that covenant. If you fulfill it, it's awesome, right? If it's broken, it's devastating. We know this is from our experience too. The thing about this covenant is it changes everything really there is about us, doesn't it? I mean, if I enter into a covenant of marriage, or when I entered into a covenant of marriage with my wife, it changed everything. It changed where I lived. It changed where I slept. It changed what I ate. It changes everything, right? The covenant, it changes things. Why? Because a covenant involves a commitment, and it's the commitment that's the secret sauce that brings about the change that we're talking about. Within the context of the human experience, within our lives, there are two life-changing covenants that we are to consider. One, I've just talked to you about. It's the covenant of marriage. Any guesses what the second life-changing covenant that we should consider? Any ideas on what that second covenant is? It's a covenant between us and who? God. That's the right answer. You're in church. You should figure that one out. God does not turn his back on humanity. And you come to Genesis chapter 12, and we see God choosing to begin a covenant with a single person, a single family, and through that covenant, he's going to change the entire world. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Wow. So God makes this covenant to Abraham. And Abraham takes God up on it. He follows God. He relocates his family just as God instructs. And all the while, God goes to work building a nation out of the family of this one man. And the Hebrew people multiplied to the point that they terrify the Egyptians. The Egyptians enslave the Hebrews to keep them from getting completely out of hand. And God hears the cries of the Hebrew people, and he sees them in the misery of their affliction. And he raises up a leader, a man named Moses. And Moses comes, and God works through Moses and leads the Hebrew people out of the nation of Egypt. And they cross the Red Sea, and they come to the mountain, to Mount Sinai. And there God meets with this people, and he reaffirms, or makes a covenant with them, this group of people that started off as Abraham's family and has now grown into a nation just like he promised. And God says, let's make a covenant. And here's what it says in Exodus 19, verse 4. You have seen, God is speaking. He says, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine. And you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. Then in verse 8, then all the people responded together, we will do all the Lord has spoken. And so we read about it in Jeremiah 31 as the nation of Judah comes to an end and it looks like all is lost. In verse 31, God issues a new covenant. Here's what he says. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. So God speaks through Jeremiah and he says, listen, Jeremiah, I'm not going to give up on humanity. Instead, I'm going to bless the world through Israel and through Judah, just as I promised Abraham all those centuries ago. None of that's going to change. And I'm going to bring about a brand new covenant. And this new covenant won't be written on stone tablets like the ones that I gave to Moses back in the former covenant. Instead, this new covenant is going to be written on the hearts of the people. And this covenant is going to change the way people live from the inside out, because their hearts will have changed. And this new covenant is going to last forever. And I will forgive people of their sin. And I will choose to remember it no more. And when Jesus comes, he fulfills all of the requirements of the old covenant, all of the ones that nobody else could pull off. Jesus checks every single box. He fulfills it all, and he makes way for a brand new covenant that isn't based on performance, but that's based on the work of God and his grace and his mercy. And he invites you and me to enter into this new covenant with God that isn't based on rules and regulations, but instead is written on our heart and changes us from the inside out. If you've accepted Christ already and you're in a covenant relationship with him, let me just ask you, how's it going? How's it going? Just stop right now if you're a Christ follower and just do a quick survey of your walk with God. Does it reflect the law of God written on your heart? I just want to challenge you over the next few weeks. We're thinking about Christmas. We're thinking about this whole season. I just want to challenge you over the next few weeks, say between now and Christmas Day. Would you just make a commitment that you're going to lead into the decisions that you make? You're going to lead into those decisions with your love of God at the forefront. So, I want you just to think about that for a moment. Maybe you're in a season of great conflict with your spouse, and you've thought about hanging it up. As you consider that decision, I just want you to ask yourself, if I look at my relationship with my spouse, am I leading with the love of Christ as I approach this relationship? Would you just do that? As you think about work, it's been a tough season for a lot of people as they pursue their jobs, and it may be that before you have been the opportunities to take certain shortcuts to try to ensure your own survival. As you look at those shortcuts, just ask yourself, am I leading with the love of God as I make these decisions in my workplace? If you're not yet in a life-changing covenant with God, what about now? What about now? I just want you to know that the whole point of the coming of Christ, the whole point of Christmas, is that God is inviting you into a covenant relationship with him. And it's an incredible privilege to be in a covenant with God, because God always keeps his covenants. And it is a privilege to be in a covenant where it is kept. I mean, in my own life, I'm blessed. I'm married to my wife, Pam, and I've got to be the most securely married man in all of Tallahassee. My wife is not going to breach my covenant with her. I know that. I can rest easy in that. It's an incredible privilege to be part of a covenant that you know is not going to be broken. And when God makes a covenant to you, when He extends that offer to you, it's a covenant that will not be broken. And it's a privilege to be in a covenant with God, because you go from wondering about your eternity to knowing about your eternity. You go from wondering if God cares about your day-to-day life to knowing that He is there for you in your day-to-day life. You go from always being alone to never being alone. That's the power of a covenant. And a covenant, it always has a formal beginning. And as God looks at you and me, He begins that covenant formally, this new covenant, by sending His Son, Jesus Christ. It's all about Christmas. Here comes God's affirmation of covenant. Emmanuel, God with us.